Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the IBME UBU show, where we discuss topics such as leadership development and organizational change management. I'm your host, Antoine Valentone, and today we're joined by our very special guest, Kenneth Murphy. Kenneth is an executive consultant, leadership and talent development coach, corporate executive, and innovative thought leader. He is also the director in career and professional development, executive career coach, adjunct professor at Pepperdine University Grazie Dio Business School. Ken is also the author of the book When Men Must Live, which is a compelling true life saga of the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of James T. Murphy, who was taken captive by Japanese imperial forces on April 9th, 1942 in the Philippine Islands, just months after the outbreak of World War II. Welcome, Ken. It's such a great pleasure of mine to meet you today and talk to you and learn more about you. Is there anything that you wanted to share about your background that I didn't include in the intro?
No, it was a nice intro. Thanks for that. It's great to see you again, Antoine. A pleasure to be here. So, no, I just we will probably get into some of this as we go along. I've had a sort of this long and winding career road that I followed, but I've in a great place here at Pepperdine doing work that I love to do, and so I'm just happy to join you.
Yeah, and of course, yes, we met a little over 2 years ago because you were one of the first instructors that I had as part of the SML program at Pepperdine. And I remember so many great things that I learned during those 3 or 4 months that we spent together. And, for example, you mentioned just moments ago, doing what you love.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's something that really resonates for me because it's definitely one of the key learnings that I took away from the MSL program. It wasn't the first time I had heard it, but obviously we've heard the cliche, do what you love and the money will follow, or do what you love and you'll never work another day in your life. So do you want to touch on, when you say doing what you love, what is it specifically that sort of, that you're passionate about and that put you on this path that you're on?
Well, really, it started with sort of a long career path leading up to today. So I'm in what I would consider my career 3.0 or third phase, if you will, of, again, a sort of a long and winding road that led me here. I didn't sit down some years ago and say I want to be a professor and a director at Pepperdine University, but when that opportunity came along, I jumped on it. And as I say, I'm thrilled to be doing what I love. And really where that came from was early background in psychology and studying, people and behavior and kind of the thinking and all of that. But it ironically led me into the corporate world or the business world rather than going down a clinical psychology path. So somewhat by happenstance, I fell into a business career, but I was in the sort of the people's and organizational building side of business. So hiring, initially recruiting and training and organizing and running sort of human resources programs or human resources services inside the corporate world. And it kind of, as I fast forwarded through that fast track career of learning and trying new things, going to new businesses or being hired and promoted, et cetera, I eventually got to a point where I wanted to do consulting. I sort of wanted to do what I was doing with more organizations and with more variety. And so there's a phase sort of going from corporate career 1.0 to the consulting world, running my own firm and partnering with others in that firm over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So again, learning and sort of a high speed and doing real work and on the fly, working in some very dynamic, growing, changing companies. So that was fulfilling another career passion, but it was all part of this road of learning about leadership, doing leadership, being in leadership roles. But my whole sort of underpinning approach to life and work is just I'm a intense learner, and I'm always trying to be the best at what I can be and do, and not just sort of trying to stand out, but rather contribute value and get paid for that value and just build a great career into a great life. And so the third phase of this later on in years was to go to Pepperdine to work on a doctoral program in leadership and change, coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, because that really was sort of a culmination of late in life education that helped me bring together a lot of what I'd been doing for decades and apply it in new ways, which is what I'm doing here at Pepperdine.
Yeah, that's great. And I do want to touch on the fact that I know you're working on your doctoral degree in a moment, but I wanted to go back because you mentioned, of course, how you got your bachelor's in psychology at Chapman University. I've always been fascinated by psychology, and I share with you that interest where you said understanding why people say and do the things that they do. And it helped me understand myself better, and also helped me understand as a leader my teams and how I could help motivate them and achieve. So for me, Maslow's hierarchy of needs was a game changer. When I stumbled upon the hierarchy of needs, it really provided all the clarity that I was looking for. And I'm just curious, did you have a similar experience with whether it was Maslow's hierarchy of needs or something else? Was there something that stands out from you from your psychology sort of background that was like the one pivotal thing that you can point to, which really just unlocked, again, other doors for you?
Well, my original interest was in counseling psychology, and again, I had an affinity. My last year in high school, I was first exposed to a psychology course, and then sort of in my meandering my way through college and experimenting with different degree options, I sort of landed back again in a comfort space of loving to study people and thought I was going to be in counseling. But when I got an opportunity to be invited to come in and be a recruiter, I sort of unconsciously took that working with people notion into a business setting. And so my interest there was not necessarily based on any one model, but to really find out, what I could contribute in a corporate or business workplace, all the while being anchored to connecting with people, helping the organization put, the right people in the right jobs at the right time to flourish. In terms of an anchor point in psychology, probably didn't really have much focus on that at the time, although as I evolved into other roles where I was starting to work in the training and development of leaders, the more of what we call organizational development, looking at performance systems and other ways that organizations engage with their employees, and how do you create a great culture. All of that work evolved from my just interest in the intersection of life and work, and how people come together in a sort of a microcosm of society, but inside a business construct. And frankly, also to be exposed to a lot of dysfunction in that world, and trying to navigate through and wrestle through and facilitate better ways of working. And that really just kept building on itself over time, to where I became more conscious about leadership models and the psychology of humans, and things like emotional intelligence and ways to improve the human response, the human condition, if you will, the human behavior in workplaces. All of it just sort of started intersecting. But along the way, Antoine, I also saw a lot of things that companies were doing as sort of their traditional approach to structures and processes, and felt like, I wanted to reinvent or rethink some of those things and find better ways to do what organizations were trying to do. And sort of I did a lot of challenging the status quo, and asking questions like, why are we doing this? How could we do it better, faster, or more, in a more streamlined way? Because it's so many places struggle with that. And leadership as a category as well, where I think there was a lot of confusion and a ton of work, a lot of money being spent, and not necessarily realizing a return on investment in leadership development. So that became a real focus of mine.
I see. Why do you think it is that organizations struggle with that so much, despite sort of the investment?
Yeah, well, I think sometimes it's under the umbrella of best practices. They're sort of following models of what people have done before and adopting, similar things, thinking it's the best way of doing things. And I've seen some practices in the last decade that were very reminiscent of what we were doing in the 1990s, if you will, just sort of outdated, but just trying to refine what might otherwise already be an archaic or somewhat broken approach. And so, yeah, and I think also human behavior gets in the way. I think we see individuals that have, egos or agendas and sometimes aren't as well balanced in terms of their total either perspective or an emotional maturity or what have you. So again, as a microcosm of society on the outside, I think people obviously that we all bring ourselves to work as who we are, but the compatibilities and incompatibilities sort of kick in different ways at different times. So I think it's just the nature of people, and I think the world's changing, by the way, so and it has been for a long time, so fast that we're not keeping up and adapting, and so that's a particular interest of mine. Maybe a last thought on that question is that as a consultant, I realized on the outside, working and being paid to come in and help organizations solve problems, if I wasn't relevant and current and at the top of my game, I wasn't going to get paid. I wasn't going to get hired. So I wasn't on a payroll where I could show up and still try to do good work. I was kind of at high risk of, needing to really bring value every day, or I would not be invited back. So it's makes you study and think hard about what we could be doing to do better at work.
Yeah. And I wanted to double click on something you said a moment ago, as far as the responsibility of leaders to be self-aware and have emotional intelligence. And I remember my leadership journey, I had to develop that self-awareness. I had to raise my emotional intelligence. And it came through some crucibles, some very painful sort of experiences, but they were eye-opening learning experiences. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the cases where you've worked with leaders, maybe they weren't there yet, and how you helped maybe get them to consider that maybe it wasn't their team's fault or everyone else around it, that maybe it was time to look internally and consider perhaps there was something they were doing or not doing that was creating maybe this chaos or dysfunction that often results from a lack of leadership.
Yeah, I think a lot of that in sort of a middle or more maturing of my career, say 10, 15, 20 years in, I had been dealing with a lot of what we would call employee relations issues in the workplace where, conflict resolution challenges where performance issues were arising and leaders and their employees had, conflict that needed to be addressed. And so counseling and coaching in small situations one-on-one, and then looking more systemically at the larger model of how are we setting work plans and goals and objectives and creating a good culture where performance is at its highest, required that we minimize or limit the dysfunction and get everybody on more or less the same value system and organizational system and game plan, if you will, rowing in the right direction, all kinds of metaphors there. But so a lot of that subsequent work from that point on for me was participating in employee engagement surveys, helping create or bring in resources, some of the expert organizations like Gallup and perhaps a couple of others who really had studied and refined ways to really tap into how do we create healthy engagement in organizations. Studying that, surveying that, getting data from within the organization to see sort of organically where were the pain points systemically in the organization. That became a heavy area of emphasis for me. And so pointing to specific cases, really it arose out of a conglomeration of lots of individual employee relations and culture building to figure out how do we how do we do this on a larger scale, including in global organizations? And of course, there's just bodies of work and great body of literature and experience and anecdotes and
Mhm.
methodologies that have come into play over the decades, because so many organizations have been dealing with the same issues. And the one thing I began to understand was training was not the be all end all solution, because you know but despite the investment of literally billions of dollars in at least certainly in the US and certainly globally, some of the same problems still persist. Yes, there are great success stories of organizations that are doing much better and building great cultures, and we applaud and recognize a lot of those. There's still places where uh, there's not enough time or commitment to invest in that in the face of all the other business demands that leaders and executives are having to pay attention to.
Indeed. I wanted to touch upon your career at Pepperdine. You joined about 8 years ago. And it's such a special place. And again, I really enjoyed my experience there being part of the MSML program. Can you talk to me about what attracted you to Pepperdine and what keeps you there after 8 years?
Yeah. Well, the it all started with an interest in the a doctoral degree. I sort of had left Silicon Valley in 2014, late 2014, and had accomplished, really in my own sense of my career, I accomplished everything I felt like I'd wanted to in the business world, the corporate world, in terms of advancement and growth and learning and giving back. And so I sort of opened up a new chapter to of life, if you will, to come to Southern California. I definitely wanted to step into a new phase of sort of energizing myself and my opportunity to learn and grow and then continue to give back of my services, whatever that would look like. And actually, my wife encouraged me to go for a doctoral degree. I was ready and willing to step up and accept that challenge. And so through that experience, starting into the learning phase of that very rigorous program, I don't shy away from saying I fell in love with Pepperdine and the people and the spirit and the culture at Pepperdine, which was all about helping develop the next generation of leaders and being committed to this idea of purpose, service, and leadership. So I felt very at home with that, and I decided, you know what, I think I'd like to work here, and started making a few connections. A door opened wide open at the business school for a role as director in the career and professional development. Again, it felt very natural, very comfortable, and allowed me to take really all of what I could bring with me from a long and substantive career in business, and see if I could share lessons learned and help open doors for the next generation of students that were coming through the business school. And that's what I've been able to do. The career role is very fulfilling. I have meaningful experiences one-on-one as well as in other group settings, and the opportunity to teach has been fantastic. And again, I didn't write that script 10 or 20 years ago in my dreams or anything. It just really materialized in the moment. And but it was very consistent with my
Yeah.
values, my purpose and mission going forward.
Yeah, I've always said I don't believe in I believe the coincidences are God's way of letting you know you're on the right path. And it sounds like things lined up for you because you were following your true north, you were doing what you love. And that reminds me, of course, of one of our textbooks that we used during your course, The True North, in the handbook, the companion handbook. It really stood out to me as something, again, that I've shared with other people since then. Can you share any, key points or major takeaways why you chose that as one of your books, and why it's important as leaders for us to identify and strive towards our true north?
Well, there's so many elements that are in play in my mind around either that book and others, frankly, that are about understanding self. And I built in the business world and my leadership oversight of building some learning and development programs globally. I either created or through osmosis absorbed some other mental frameworks and models, but the one I came up with really that worked for me and still sustains today is that the self is kind of the core understanding of self-awareness. What are your skills, your attributes, your beliefs, your values? All of those things are at the core of the development of good leaders, and that's something that I've always paid attention to and on my own. And I think that formed the basis of wanting to see organizations invest more time in getting people to slow down and think about deeply, who they are, what they're trying to be, their why, if you will, their underlying passions and interests, and also how they act and behave. What are they, what are we and they trying to get better at, and how do you do that? So I think there's a lot of learnable, teachable, learnable elements of leadership that are part of the self and self-reflection. I think Goleman and others have shown us that emotional intelligence can be built upon and learned. There are certainly some people that have some innate qualities and characteristics that are in that, compatible with, strong emotional intelligence, and other, character traits that are really underpinnings of great leadership. But all of those things can be enhanced, developed by paying attention to them, looking at what underlying behaviors and thoughts are, can contribute to more effectiveness there. And so, so that, starts with self, and then builds outward to your relationship with others, teaming with others, leading others. And I think the third outer ring or outer dimension of that concept for me was also having business acumen and a sense of whatever enterprise you're in, understanding, the business, the what makes it tick, what's the business model, how does that organization play in the global marketplace. So there's sort of these interconnected layers or nesting of layers that are all part of the leadership journey and the leadership development.
An amazing book, to be sure. And again, I greatly benefited from it, and I highly recommend to other leaders, and have already many times to some of my colleagues and friends. And speaking of books, it turns out you're also an author, and you wrote your own book called When Men Must Live. Can you talk to us about that book and
Sure.
what it's all about?
Well, briefly, and then anything that I can share with the viewers that they want to know before or after this conversation, I'm open to that. But yeah, my father was a prisoner of war in World War II. So obviously going back 80 years plus, or give or take. He in his early formative adult years, like 19, 20 years old, joined the military, went over to the Philippines, and was having a wonderful career in the Army Air Corps. And then World War II broke out, and he ended up being taken captive. He spent 3.5 years incredibly surviving everything from what's known as the Bataan Death March all the way through, pretty intense, like extremely intense captivity in multiple POW camps. Ultimately, he was working in a Japanese copper mine as part of virtually a slave labor force at the time during the latter part of World War II, and before being liberated at the end of the war. So growing up, we did not know much about anything at all really about the story. There were a couple of books laying around the house, like almost like military yearbooks with his picture, and something, a cover that talked about Bataan and World War II. And but in my later years and early to mid adulthood, started asking a lot of questions and decided, it'd be great to write a book with him. So he is the co-author. I'm really the one who put words to his story. He told the story, and I just really captured it and tried to write it in a way that could draw out some themes and a lot about his values. But he was a resilient person. He was faith-based, and really had a number of sort of what could only be called miracles that occurred that allowed him to survive and return home and have a great life and have a family and raise us kids. And It's just a book that I
Yeah.
didn't write it as a war story. We wrote it as an inspirational story that's readable by anyone, and we found a market for people, men, women,
Yeah.
adolescents. It's not really a children's book. There's some difficult passages in there about what he endured, but it's really written in the spirit of capturing some themes and values that helped him survive and become a very resilient person. So that's how that came about.
Yeah, it sounds like an incredible story, and like you said, certainly a miracle that he survived, right? I mean, despite I'm sure the the terrible treatment and the experience, and I'm sure obviously there's many that didn't sort of get through that. And you mentioned
On a positive note, if I may too, he reconciled that very instantaneously after he was liberated. He reconciled all of that in his mind, and he did not harbor ill will toward his Japanese captors or the Japanese society. He never taught anything to us about
Mhm,
that sort of negative perception of other
mhm,
cultures or nations. And I had an opportunity years later to write, after we published the book, to write an article in the Japan Times that also
mhm.
was, very reconciliatory in tone about, more about the things we may have in common than what our
Yeah,
differences are. But
yeah.
he just had, incredible. He's an incredible human being, and he's still with us today.
Oh,
He's still around. He's 103 years old, and
wow.
he he would be delighted to know we're having this conversation, which I'll share with him afterwards.
Yeah, please. That's amazing, and again, also a testament to his character and his morals, not to hold any grudges and process that the way he did. Certainly took mental and intestinal fortitude, I'm sure. Talk to me about the experience. It must have been nice for you to experience writing a book with your father.
Yeah,
You
it's a
experiencing it.
complex process. I like to believe it's only the first of other books, but obviously one of the most important things I could do, and honestly in my life, and in terms of what that meant to me and what I think it meant to him. His
Mhm.
only goal was to just tell his story and share it with others, and just let it be a lesson of he's always said, if he can do that, anyone can do anything they set out to do with, to overcome. So he wanted that to be part of his legacy. And writing a book is a grueling process. It took months and months and months of not necessarily every day and every night, at the keyboard, but interviews, recordings, processing. How could we weave this into a tale that would be hopefully a compelling read, and hopefully we did
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But very very life affirming to be able to spend quality time with him, to really understand that. And in the course of that, he brought out photographs, and he brought out family archives, and he brought out a few artifacts that he brought home from his time there, some of which are sitting behind me.
Hmm.
Anyway, we could do a whole another piece on that sometime, but right under this lamp right behind here, in
Hmm.
this little box, is a piece of copper ore from the
Uh,
copper mine where he was a slave laborer for a year at the latter stage of the war. And so it's just meaningful to have
sure.
some of those things around to remind me of what he went through. And I
Indeed.
think the inspiration to me is what is it that I would be unable to do if I didn't have that belief that got him through what he got through. So
Right.
it's a source of inspiration to me as well.
Indeed, it is, and I'm sure everyone else would enjoy reading that story and learning about it. So again, we'll share a link on in the description of this video to the book, and obviously how others can get a hold of you and learn more. One final question I wanted to ask you before we wrap up.
Sure.
You and I'm sure we can remember not that long ago, there was a time when students went to school physically and they used actual notebooks and pens. And now we live in this virtual world where everything's online. And obviously now the introduction of AI technology makes, again, information readily available to anyone with an internet connection. Some have questioned the value of continued education in traditional sort of institutions. Just curious, what's your thoughts on that, looking out into the future?
Yeah, well, there's a lot changing. We know that some of the traditional delivery systems for learning through an academic institution are being challenged, and that's fair. There's other ways for people to access learning through either other different kinds of institutions or on their own or through other certificate programs or other more compact experiences instead of necessarily going to a 4-year undergrad or 2+ year, graduate school and so forth. I don't see the big institutions and places like Pepperdine going away. I think there are all, a lot of people have a lot of opinions about the value of those kinds of places, and I support a lot of that. I don't think it has to be an either or. I just know that through our digital world that learning is accessible even under a Pepperdine banner through online courses and even in classroom virtual through Zoom. I've taught a whole bunch of classes on Zoom, and I still go in a couple of days a week to our West LA campus or Irvine campus to teach in front of students. So any and all the above, I think, are here for at least a good while, as far as I can see. I think as long as we're encouraging learning, I've been a lifelong learner. I know that's a cliche, but look at where I'm at. I'm deep into a multi-decade career, and I came back to continue to learn in this chapter of my life and in this chapter of my career. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. There doesn't have to be an on or off switch to learning, and that's been part of my life story. Even if I wasn't enrolled in a formal program, I've been driven by wanting to learn more and then figure out how to apply that and be the best that I can be.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I agree with you. I think that while certainly it is now easier than ever to find and consume information, knowledge, I know that there's no replacement for that face-to-face interaction and experience of being around other students that are pursuing similar goals, have shared values, in those relationships with not just the faculty, but the other students as well. And I know that the in-person meetups were definitely one of the things I looked forward to the most during my MSML journey, and wish that I would have more opportunities to do that. So I'm with you there. And, at all institutions, but specifically Pepperdine, which is a very special place for many different reasons.
Well, and we talk about learning communities, and again, communities can be virtual and through the lens of the camera or the computer, but again, different people have different preferences for how they learn and who they want to be around. We saw that during the pandemic. Some people felt separated and disengaged and needed to physically be present again in the workplace, and others not so much. So right now I'm personally also in a hybrid space of I get a lot of my work done at home or in a home office setting, and then I get to engage physically and personally with people I work with, coworkers and students directly face to face. So it all seems to come together and work somehow, and I enjoy that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Ken, this has been wonderful. I've really, really been looking forward to this for a while and thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I mentioned I'll share again a link to the book in the description below, also a link to your LinkedIn page. How else should anyone that wants to get in touch with you and learn more get in touch with you?
Well, my mainstay place of contact is at Pepperdine. So my email is kenneth.murphy@pepperdine.edu. We can either link that or just go with that. It's pretty straightforward. And I'm accessible a lot. I do consult and counsel with students on career development issues, and that's kind of a day job. And by night, I'm a professor working as an adjunct professor, teaching a bunch of different classes. So I'm Southern California based, but I'm a world traveler, and look forward to anyone that wants to reach out. I'd be happy to have a conversation just as we're having today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ken. Really appreciate it.
It's great to see you. Great to be a part of this. Thank you for having me.
Likewise.